The woman collapsed between the flour barrels and the seed bins, her body folding like paper before anyone could catch her. Caleb Thorne watched from the back corner of Mackenzie's trading post as men stepped over her skirts, muttering about city folk who couldn't handle mountain winters. He set down the rope he'd been examining and moved through the crowd, his massive frame parting bodies without a word. When he knelt beside her, he saw hollow cheeks, cracked lips, and 3 children huddled against the wall behind the counter, watching their mother with eyes too old for their faces. He lifted her as easily as kindling, turned toward the door, and never once looked back at the whispers that followed him into the snow. 6 weeks earlier, the stagecoach to Timber Ridge had lurched to a stop in a January blizzard, and Margaret Holloway stepped into the worst decision of her life. The driver pointed toward a rough settlement barely visible through the whiteout and shouted that he'd go no further until the storm broke. She gathered her 3 children, Emma, 7, Thomas, 5, and baby Samuel, and trudged toward the cluster of buildings, each step through knee-deep, snow-stealing strength she didn't have to spare. Her husband's cousin was supposed to meet them here. That's what the letter had promised after Robert died, crushed under a warehouse collapse in Philadelphia. "Come west," the letter said. "I have work and a place for you." Margaret had sold everything they owned for the coach fare. The cousin's name was Edmund Holloway. She found him in the back room of the settlement's only saloon, drunk and furious when she arrived. "You brought children?" he spat, whiskey heavy on his breath. Letter said nothing about children. "I need a housekeeper, not a damn nursery." His cabin was barely weathertight, one room with gaps between the logs that whistled with wind. He gave her 2 weeks to prove her worth before he'd put her back on the next stage east. Margaret worked herself past exhaustion. She scrubbed floors, cooked meals, mended clothes until her fingers bled. Edmund paid her nothing, claimed room and board were wages enough. When she asked for money to buy milk for Samuel, he laughed and said the baby could drink water like everyone else. The 2 weeks became 4, then 6. Edmund dangled the promise of eventual payment like a carrot before a mule, always just out of reach. The children grew thinner. Margaret's own meals became whatever scraps remained after Edmund finished eating. She began walking to the trading post every few days, hoping to find work, someone hiring, anyone who might offer something better than slow starvation in a cousin's grudging charity. Mackenzie, who ran the post, was a hard man in a hard place. He let her sweep his floors for pennies, enough to buy a little cornmeal, never enough to get ahead. The other settlers watched with the careful neutrality of people who'd seen desperation before and learned not to let it become their problem. The mountain man came down from the high timber once a month. Margaret had seen him twice before the day she fainted, a giant of a man with a thick, dark beard, shoulders that filled doorways, and hands scarred from work she couldn't imagine. He moved through the trading post like a force of nature, speaking only when necessary, his voice a low rumble that seemed to come from somewhere deep in the earth. People gave him space, not from fear exactly, though he looked capable of terrible things. From respect, or maybe recognition that he existed by different rules than the rest of them. The morning she collapsed, Margaret had eaten nothing for 2 days, saving every scrap for the children. Samuel was crying with hunger she couldn't satisfy. Emma's lips had a blue tinge that terrified her. Thomas had stopped complaining, which was worse. She'd left them hidden behind the counter at the trading post, told them to be silent as mice, and tried to negotiate with Mackenzie for credit she knew he wouldn't extend. The room tilted. The floor rushed up. Then nothing. She woke to the creak of a wagon and the smell of wood smoke. She was wrapped in a bearskin, thick and warm, moving through snow-laden forest. Her children sat beside her, Emma holding Samuel, Thomas gripping her hand like a lifeline. The mountain man sat up front, his broad back to them, driving a team of massive draft horses through trees that seemed to bend away from his passage. "Where?" Margaret's voice came out as a croak. "My cabin," he said without turning. "Your children said you hadn't eaten. Said the man you're staying with won't feed you proper." "We can't. I have no money to pay you." Didn't ask for money. The wagon climbed higher into country she'd never seen, following a track barely visible under fresh snow. The trees grew larger, the silence deeper. Margaret tried to sit up, but weakness pushed her back down. Emma stroked her hair with small, cold fingers. "Mama, is he taking us home?" the girl whispered. Margaret looked at the mountain man's shoulders, at the easy strength with which he guided the horses through impossible terrain, and didn't have an answer. She didn't know if she'd just been saved or if she'd traded one trap for another. The cabin appeared through the trees like something from a dream, solid, large, smoke rising from a stone chimney. The mountain man pulled the wagon to a stop and finally turned to look at her. "Name's Caleb Thorne," he said. "And you're safe here. All of you." The cabin's interior hit Margaret like a physical force. Warmth from a fire that could have roasted a whole hog, the scent of bread and venison stew, space enough for her whole Philadelphia row home to fit inside. Caleb carried her to a chair by the hearth while her children clustered around her skirts. He ladled stew into wooden bowls without ceremony, set them on a massive table hewn from a single slab of pine, and stepped back. "Eat slow," he said. "Too much at once'll make you sick." Thomas grabbed his bowl with both hands, but Emma stopped him, looking to Margaret for permission. The caution in her daughter's eyes, the learned wariness of a child who had been disappointed too often, broke something in Margaret's chest. "It's all right, sweetheart," she whispered. They ate like starving animals, trying to remember table manners. Caleb busied himself at the far end of the cabin, giving them space, feeding the fire, checking the windows. When Samuel began to fuss, Caleb appeared with a cup of warm goat's milk. "Got 2 nannies in the shed out back," he said, handing it to Margaret. "They're good producers." She stared at him. "You keep goats?" "Up here. Keep a lot of things." He gestured around the cabin. Now that her vision had cleared, Margaret saw what she'd missed: shelves lined with preserves and dried goods, smoked meat hanging from the rafters, a root cellar door in the floor, barrels of flour and cornmeal. Wealth beyond measure by the standards of Timber Ridge settlement. The children fell asleep in a pile by the fire, their bellies full for the first time in weeks. Margaret tried to stay awake, tried to form words of gratitude, but exhaustion pulled her under like dark water. She woke to morning lights streaming through glass windows, real glass, not oiled paper, and the sound of Caleb splitting wood outside. Emma and Thomas were at the window, watching him with open mouths. Each swing of his axe split logs like they were butter, his breath puffing white in the cold air. Margaret found bread, cheese, and dried apples laid out on the table. A note in rough letters: "Eat. Rest. We'll talk when you're stronger." 3 days passed in a haze of sleep and small meals. Caleb ran his trap lines during the day, returning with snowshoe hare, pine marten, a young elk that he'd butchered with efficient precision. He gave the children small tasks: stacking kindling, gathering eggs from the chickens he somehow kept alive through mountain winters. He spoke little but watched everything, those sharp eyes missing nothing. On the 4th day, Margaret felt strong enough to stand without swaying. She found Caleb at his workbench, scraping a beaver pelt with careful strokes. "Mr. Thorne, just Caleb. Caleb, I need to know what you expect from us. What this arrangement is." He set down his scraper and turned to face her. Up close, she could see the scars on his hands, the weathered creases around his eyes. A hard man, but not a cruel one. She'd learned the difference. "You need a place that's safe. I have one. Your children need feeding. I have more food than one man needs." Seems simple enough. Nothing's that simple. Men don't. She stopped, searching for words that wouldn't offend. Men don't take in women and children out of pure charity. Most men are fools. He met her eyes directly. "You work yourself near death trying to keep your children alive. That takes strength. The kind that's worth something in country like this. I can work. I can cook, clean, mend, I know. I've watched you. You've got spine." He turned back to his pelt. "Here's what I'm offering, clear and plain. You and the children stay. You manage the household, cooking, preserving, the work that needs doing inside. I handle the trap lines, the hunting, the outside work. We split it fair, like partners. Come spring, if you want to leave, I'll take you wherever you need to go. But if you stay, this becomes your home same as mine." Margaret's throat tightened. "Why would you do this?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "I was married once. Long time ago, before I came to the mountains. She died bringing our son into the world. Baby died too. After that, I couldn't stomach cities anymore. All those people pushing and grabbing and stepping over each other. Came up here where things made sense." But he paused. A man can have too much silence. Can forget what it's like to have life in his house. Your children's laughter, the sound of someone cooking breakfast, The knowledge that the work matters to more than just staying alive another day. I'm not asking you to be my wife. I'm asking if you'll share this space, make it a home instead of just a shelter. The honesty of it staggered her. No false promises, no hidden demands. Just a trade between two people who needed what the other had. And if I say yes, if we stay, then your family, under my protection, and anyone who tries to hurt you answers to me. Margaret thought of Edmund's cabin with its whistling walls, Mackenzie's grudging pennies, the slow starvation she'd been powerless to prevent. She thought of her children warm and fed, Emma's laughter returning, Thomas's color improving daily. We'll stay, she said. Spring came to the high country like a prayer answered. Snow retreated up the peaks, revealing meadows of wildflowers that made Emma shriek with joy. The creek behind the cabin swelled with runoff, and Caleb taught Thomas to fish, the boy's small hand dwarfed by his own as he demonstrated the proper way to set a hook. Margaret had transformed the cabin into something that felt like a home. Curtains hung in the windows, carved from fabric Caleb brought from the trading post without being asked. Her preserves lined the shelves in neat rows. Samuel, thriving on goat's milk and constant warmth, pulled himself up on furniture and babbled sounds that would soon become words. The partnership worked with unexpected ease. Caleb respected boundaries, gave her space, never pushed for more than what was offered. But slowly, in ways neither acknowledged aloud, the distance between them narrowed. He began timing his return from traplines to coincide with supper. She started mending his clothes without being asked, her stitches careful and small. They developed routines, her pouring his coffee in the morning, him stacking extra firewood by her work area so she wouldn't have to carry heavy loads. In May, Edmund appeared on the trail to the cabin, drunk and bellicose, demanding Margaret return to fulfill her obligations. He made it as far as the clearing before Caleb stepped out to meet him. "You're on my land," Caleb said quietly. "Turn around. That woman owes me for room and board. I'm taking her back. She owes you nothing. You worked her near to death and starved her children. You've got until I count to 10 to be gone." Edmund reached for the pistol at his belt. He never cleared leather. Caleb moved with startling speed for a man his size, catching Edmund's wrist in one massive hand and squeezing until the gun dropped. He lifted Edmund by the shirt front until his boots left the ground. "You come back here. You even look toward this mountain again. They'll find what's left of you come spring thaw. We clear." Edmund nodded frantically. Caleb dropped him, and the man scrambled back down the trail, not once looking back. Margaret had watched from the doorway, children behind her. When Caleb returned to the cabin, she met his eyes and saw not violence but protection, the difference between a man who fought because he enjoyed it and one who fought because something worth protecting stood behind him. "Thank you," she said simply. That night, after the children slept, they sat by the fire with coffee. The silence between them had become comfortable, something shared rather than endured. "I meant what I said that first day," Caleb offered. "Come summer, if you want to go back east or down to one of the big settlements, I'll take you. Make sure you're set up proper." Margaret stared into the flames. "I spent 32 years in Philadelphia. Had a husband I loved, a small house, neighbors on all sides. I thought that was what life looked like. That anything else was." She paused. "This is the first place I've ever felt like I could breathe. Like what I did mattered not because someone else said so, but because I chose it. That a yes to staying? That's a yes to staying." The summer brought traders and trappers through the high country, and word spread about Caleb Thorne's household. Some whispered, of course, small minds always did. But most understood the truth when they saw Margaret working beside Caleb at the trading post, negotiating prices for his pelts with sharp intelligence while he stood silent and approving at her shoulder. Saw the way the children called him Caleb with easy affection, the way he carved them toys and taught them to track and identify plants. By autumn, when the first snows returned to the peaks, Mackenzie approached them at the trading post with a proposition. He was getting old, wanted to sell out and move to warmer country. Would they consider buying the business? Margaret and Caleb exchanged glances, that wordless communication they'd developed over months of shared work. "We'll think on it," Caleb said. That night, they discussed it by the fire. The trading post would mean more time in the settlement, less isolation, a future that looked different than either had imagined. "I never wanted to be around people much," Caleb admitted. "But I've learned there's a difference between being around people and building something with someone you trust." Margaret reached across the space between their chairs and took his scarred hand in hers. The touch was deliberate, chosen, freely given. "Build it with me," she said. They bought the trading post that winter and renamed it Holloway and Thorne. Margaret's business sense and Caleb's reputation for fair dealing made it the most successful operation in the territory within 2 years. They expanded the cabin, adding rooms for the growing children. Thomas apprenticed with Caleb, learning the mountains. Emma discovered she had a gift for numbers and helped Margaret with the books. People stopped whispering. They came instead for honest trade, sound advice, and the knowledge that at Holloway and Thorne, no one who genuinely needed help would be turned away hungry. 5 years after the day Margaret collapsed in the old trading post, Caleb stood beside her on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the meadow while Samuel, now 7, tried to teach the goats to pull a small cart he'd built. "Never thought I'd have this again," Caleb said. "Family. Purpose beyond just surviving another winter." Margaret leaned against his solid warmth. This man who'd carried her from darkness into light without asking for anything but partnership and honesty. "Never thought I'd have it at all," she replied. "Real home. Not the place you're tied to, but the place that holds you because you choose it." In the distance, the mountains stood eternal and indifferent, but the life built in their shadow was anything but. It was chosen, fought for, and defended, not with walls but with the simple, radical act of 2 broken people deciding that together, they were strong enough to build something that would last.